Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Latifa Farah, Associate Creative Producer at Venture for Canada and the producer of a new wave of entrepreneurship. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and Canadian entrepreneurs to learn about how they've developed their entrepreneur mindset and skills. In Season 5, we'll be chatting with CEOs, founders, and successful business leaders about their career journeys. We're excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive.
I'm very excited to have Todd Finch on a new wave of entrepreneurship this morning. Todd, we've known each other for a couple of years. One of the Venture Canada board members and a fellow alumni, Josh McIntyre, worked with you for several years at Presley, and you judged at several Venture for Canada selection events over the years. We're really excited to have you on the podcast this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we've been chatting a little bit before this, and you're currently writing a book. Can you describe to our listeners, what is the thesis of your book?
What's the thesis of my book? Well, I think I was inspired about 6 or 7 years ago about like I've been in technology for 35 years, and I've seen the accelerated pace of innovation and the accelerated pace of change, and that dealing with that has become more and more difficult. And so what I want to do is really dive into, what's the future of leadership with all of this change and with all of this innovation? How does the human fare, and what does leadership look like? And so I'm writing a book. It's called The Leadership of One: The Future of Leadership in a Decentralized World. And it's tapping on this common denominator that we all have. I think the lowest common denominator of life, called energy. And right down to the cellular level, what drives the cell is energy, particles moving within. And so if we can align using simple language that actually doesn't depend or rely on words at all, but relies on a factual platform like energy to lead, to follow, and to understand the world around us. I think it acts as a platform to bring all of the other complexities in leadership to bear, because leadership is very multidimensional. It's not about one thing. It's not about standing in front of a crowd and being a great orator or being a good planner. It's about physiology. It's about neurology. It's about neurobiology. It's about spirituality. It's about wellness. It's about fitness. It's about so many different channels. And so the journey to really become a great leader is an ongoing thing. It's not a one and done thing. And so the book it's going to be a premise and a platform for an institute that we're launching called the Xchange Institute.
So kind of on the topic of adaptability, we've talked a lot about why it's important, why it matters. How do you think kind of concretely someone can go about and actually develop the competency of adaptability?
Well, again, back to the book, it starts with the most sophisticated energy life form, or the most sophisticated organization on the world, which is yourself. And humans are a replication of what's around us. We internally have trillions and billions of components and cells and neurons that interoperate in networks, different systems, different energy. We have multiple sources of energy. We have thermal energy, we have chemical energy, we have kinetic energy. And so there's a lot going on here. And Dr. Dan Siegel, neurobiologist, basically brings to the attention that the mind is actually a separate thing we need to be developing and nurturing, separate from the brain body. And the brain body is this very intricate organism that you also have to be leading. And so, and then the third being the person, this human interaction that we're talking about. And these people, this loneliness that you were referring to, connectivity with other life is the most important thing. Plants, trees, forest baths, those things, people are starting to understand scientifically that the kind of photonic connectivity that is happening, the benefit, the mutual benefit of that journey of a walk in the woods, truly, it's developmental. It's part of our thriving life and our energy. It feeds our energy source. A pet is incredible energy. And what's so great about a pet, specifically a dog, is their intentions are fairly one-dimensional. Love unconditionally. And so having that alignment in your life, having that connectivity gives you energy. And then of course, human to human, what Siegel talks about is that this is part of evolution. Us communicating back and forth, us creating language, us creating new technologies and code collaboratively together, that connectivity develops us. It moves us forward. It changes us. It changes everything around us. So back to what you have to do, you have to focus on your self-awareness. Who are you as an organization? And who are you as a mind?
To the point about self-awareness, and I completely agree, it's probably one of the most important leadership traits, because if you're not self-aware, it's easy to burn yourself out. And I think unself-aware leaders are ones where that can become tyrants, are the people, throwing books or just kind of, they can go kind of, be very volatile. So to the point about kind of concrete habits, like what are things you recommend listeners kind of concretely do in terms of like everyday habits to foster that sense of self-awareness?
Oh, I love that question. The first and most important thing is understand what your stand is. You hear the word purpose, usually used a lot for the corporation. Intentions, you probably hear a lot, your goals, your values, your KPIs, all of that stuff. But as an individual, what do you stand for? And what I do is, with all of my CEOs I coach, I get them to that core root, because everybody's so busy trying to get things done, they actually haven't really deeply thought about what they stand for. And when they stop and they spend that time, it's first of all, it's liberating, because what I say is it's got to be 5 things. It can't be 10 or 20 things. What do you stand for? And your health and wellness, that's number 1. Your family, your relationships. You might have a vocation or something you want to do to build your agency. The community, how you want to make the community a better community, or your society a better society, or the world a better world. And so first and foremost, I get people focused on what do they stand for. And then what I focus on is keeping them in what I call the intention-attention paradox, which is, if your attention is 100% aligned with your intentions, you're going to have no problems at all. But what happens is your attention is always diverted with news, with family issues, with life challenges, and all of that. And so how can you, just with that simple technique, and we go through that a lot, is how do you hone the ability to, first of all, know where your attention is diverting, and exercises to get that attention back on your intention. And then within the managing your self-awareness, what we always do is there's a ground in all energy. To create a clean energy feed, you have a ground, and the energy ground is love, generosity, gratitude, and respect.
A point of focusing and being really aware of how you spend your attention, I think, is something that's particularly critical. And it's been something I've been working on over the last year. I kind of went down this spiral where I really was not being mindful of my attention at all. I was probably checking the news constantly, social media, all these things. And now it's very much like, okay, I check the news once a day in the morning. I spend 10 minutes on TikTok in the morning. That is it. No more TikTok for the rest of the day. But there's so much temptation, because I'm like, oh, I'll just check TikTok for a sec. Oh, I want to check the New York Times. And it's like, and one of the things I've been trying to train myself is, okay, if I do that, what am I losing? What am I not spending attention on? And I think it's been an important thing to focus on, is that we all have finite amount of attention that we can spend in a day. If we're spending attention on garbage or on distractions or on things that really are not valuable or that make us feel bad, it becomes a snowball. And it's really important, I think, to live each day with that kind of awareness of your thoughts. And also, I think this is another point, is so much of being a leadership, but also I think self-management is self-restraint. Like we all have temptations to go rant, if we're focused on something, say, oh, I'm just going to go check social media, right? Or do something. But the ability to say, I hear that thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep on focusing. Or, a negative thought comes in, and it's easy to get sucked in to be self-critical but to be like, I hear that thought, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. And it's this lifelong journey. And I think that, frankly, the more responsibility somebody has, the more challenging it can be to have that kind of intent. So one other thing you said, Todd, which I'd love to talk a little bit more about, is the importance of values. And there's a great quote by Chesterton where he once wrote that those who stand for nothing will stand for anything. And I think it's an important point to highlight, because fundamentally, if somebody doesn't have core values, if somebody doesn't care about anything, then they can just be a rudderless ship going in any kind of direction, wasting their time or pursuing things that could be really detrimental. So on the topic of values, Todd, what would you describe as your core values, and why did you select them?
Oh, wow. Good question. So look, what I'm learning and unlearning is I was born as a sales guy, and the development of a sales guy in 1987 and 1990 something was hard hitting, be gritty, call, dial. And so you built this, the Anthony Robbins, blah, blah, blah. But what you start to realize is people matter so much in not just business, not just sales, but in life. And so I have really kind of built these core values focused on people first. And then the next layer from that is value first. So how can I help? And that's it seems very basic and simple, but it isn't, because people are out trying to make a living. So usually the first conversation is, what's the contract? The trust today is through contracts, through brands, and through currency. And we have to, and I'm trying to invest in values that have you always starting with, how can I help? Our whole company that we've launched, our fund that we've launched, instead of going and doing due diligence with our companies, we ask, how can we help? And we do it for free. And so what we're doing is we're shifting our focus from cost of sale, which everybody understands very intimately, to cost of solve. And so instead of an organization's attention or an individual's attention being on, well, what can I do to earn this person's trust so they can give me money and contracts? It's, what can I do to help this person? And what can I do to solve an immediate problem for this person unconditionally? And that nuance, that shift, I think could be massively game changing. And it's what we're building our network around, is building a network of people that come together that act first on creating value, and then worry about the other things later. And we can talk about that in detail. So human-centered and value first are the two core things for me. And then obviously I really really trust is a cornerstone to everything. And so the integrity of how you kind of move forward and do things, and then obviously family and the relationships that are closest to me are the most valuable.
On the topic of trust, one thing I find is we often think, okay, trust is something that's really important, but it's also a currency that's of decreasing prevalence. You look at all these trust barometer surveys, and trust in government, trust in corporations, trust even in doctors has gone way down over the last kind of couple of decades. So, Todd, what would you say, like what does a trusting relationship look like to you? And then what does a non-trusting relationship? And I know if you're a listener, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds like a little bit of like a rudimentary question, but the reason I'm asking it is because I think a lot of the times we don't necessarily think about what trust looks like kind of tangibly and what it doesn't look like. And to your point, Todd, I completely agree. Like trust is something integral, I think, for success, but also I think for happiness. So would love to know your thoughts on what trust looks like and what trust doesn't look like.
Part of my book actually decodes trust. So what we've done is we've worked with some universities in INSEAD, University of Australia, a couple of universities that are local around the trust equation. And you know, there's different equations that are out there. We're playing with a bunch of them, but credibility, reliability, and intimacy over intention and risk. And so to unpack that, people are very trustworthy when there isn't an intention that is conflictory, or if there isn't risk that is in front of them. But the second that those two things are introduced, well, a lot of things can unwind. And so coming back to the top line, credibility, reliability, and intimacy, you know, your relationship with your wife is extremely intimate. Your relationship with your boss is intimate to a certain degree and certain level, but it's really interesting to understand different leadership styles, because to me, great leaders really become intimately knowledgeable and they seek to understand about other people. And so I find that the intimacy side, I think everybody that is a good, high integrity person is reliable. They do what they say they're going to do. And you know, the credibility of a person is that's their agency. If you're good in sales, if you're good in science, if you're a good programmer, if you do what you say you're going to do, those are the things. Those are basic blocking and tackling things. It really does come down to the intimacy, because you know, when somebody reaches out and wishes you a happy birthday on Facebook, that's not a very intimate thing. That's just a thing that we've all been blurred by. But becoming more curious and seeking to understand about what really matters to that other person, that's where trust really starts to develop in my mind's eye, because you care. And people know if you care for a reason or if you just unconditionally care. And so taking condition away from our relationship in general, and then heightening the intimacy of that relationship is really, really important. But you brought up something really important. The world that we're in, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, it's the attention economy. And that intention economy, if you actually go to the other side of what's the intention, and there are a lot of people that are online that have very good intentions and they really want to help people. But there are a lot of people that just want to make money, go get the cheddar. And so this is, we've hit that breaking point, I believe. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to start to see people to qualify that trust, understanding what their intentions truly are, you know, both in the interaction that you're having with one another, but also, you know, but back to what I said, intimately getting to know what one stands for, aligning with that, and then being able to figure out how you can collaborate together to go build value together, whether it's value in a relationship or value in a business or value in society. That's how I kind of look at it. And you unwound me on a topic, because I really believe in it, and I believe we're in square one understanding it now in this decentralized world where a top-down leadership model is going to not really win the day. And so how do people start to collaborate successfully? How do people create value together successfully? And I think the covenant, the underlying core to all great connections is that trust that we're talking about.
And it's particularly complex to cultivate that trust in this digital age that we operate in. The world is changing, and we're, a lot of times talking to people purely in a virtual sense. So Todd, you were one of the first 40 employees at Netscape. You were really on the very beginning period of the internet. And one of the things that came to mind is when you talk about the internet, when you talk about the rise of TikTok and Facebook and the tremendous influence that they have on society. If you were to go back almost 30 years in time and time travel and go out to lunch with Todd of 1995, let's say, so 27 years ago, and you were to describe what the internet is today, the impact that it has on society, how do you think the Todd of 27 years, do you think that the Todd of 27 years ago would be happy with where the internet is today? Or do you think the Todd of 27 years ago would say, okay, this is gone, the internet, all of our aspirations for it, it's turned into a Frankenstein, or somewhere in between?
Well, first of all, just to give a shout out to Mark Andreessen and Ben for that matter, but mostly Mark, because Mark is just such a visionary. And when I say visionary, that's a overused word, but in Mark's sense, he's just so forward looking and forward thinking. And I remember Mark, when I would bring our customers down to talk to Jim Barksdale and Mark and the other executives, Mark would always dive into where it's going, where this is ultimately the destination of this. And this is what it really was, the cocaine that hooked me to entrepreneurship for the rest of my life, because he saw so clearly what was going to be. So in one way, it's kind of like, yeah, we're probably where we needed to be from a technological perspective, from how the world was going to see things. I remember a specific moment where he would draw boxes, and draw small boxes to huge boxes, and on one it would be like a jumbotron, like 100 feet by 20 feet, and then on the other one would be 2 inches by 5 inches or whatever. Like, so what he was trying to communicate, that wherever you are, whatever you do, whenever you're there, you're going to have access to information. And back in 1994, 1995, we had dial-up modems, and it was unfathomable to a lot of people. And he was saying the ubiquity of interfaces, it's not going to matter. What's going to matter is what you deliver to that screen and how you activate that capability for human utility. And he came up with the word software is going to eat the world about 10 years ago. I always ask how the world's going to eat, but that's a whole other conversation.
To your point about the famous Mark Andreessen line that software is eating the world, but how are people going to eat? One thing that a lot of people criticize the technology industry increasingly is that a lot of entrepreneurs are focused more on, okay, how do we build out the metaverse and virtual worlds? How do we get people to Mars, right? How do we get more people into space? And it's like a common critique, in particular of Elon Musk, is that, okay, he cares more and more about getting people to Mars than using his vast wealth to actually solve problems like here on Earth. And whether that criticism is fair, is a whole other debate, which I will not say my own personal views on. But I think that I think ultimately, though, is that this is something that's being talked about. There's a lot more criticism of Silicon Valley, of tech firms, of billionaires being detached from the immense suffering that we already have on Earth, and how do we actually solve these problems? So, Todd, my question to you is, like, have entrepreneurs in a lot of the tech sector lost the script? Like, are people working on some of the fundamentally wrong problems? To quote the Peter Thiel phrase, did we dream of flying cars and all we got is 140 characters? Do you think that entrepreneurs need to be more focusing on how do we solve the existential challenges that we're facing as a society, rather than just maximizing their own pocketbooks?
Yes, and again, back to human energy. Human energy, the only enemy to human energy, and this is another Nikola Tesla-ism, is this thing called friction. And how he referred to friction was human ignorance. I don't think 130 years later that's as politically correct as maybe the human condition. But humans tend to judge and assess and evaluate, and we were never meant to be that. And so the back to what you're talking about the focus, people need to stop judging right, wrong, good, bad, and really align with positive intentions that are going to help people and life on earth first. So where I go, where I stand for is that people have fallen off the script. And so there's money, there's space, there's experience, but people, humans, life, it became quite secondary. And hindsight's been our friend in a couple of things. And one of them is the environment, where, Al Gore years ago said, hey, inconvenient truth, this is what's happening. It's like, no, it's not happening. And I think if we sought to understand as opposed to judge what it did to your oil revenues, or what it did to your economic agenda, or what it did to your jobs, or whatever it is. But what I believe is people, that life has fallen off the script, yes. And that this whole metaverse, move to the metaverse, it's an experience. And in context to it being an experience, that's great. Like every time I kind of put on those headsets, I get dizzy, I've run into walls, but I actually have fun when I'm doing it, and there's great experiences. And so do we deserve, with technology like this, to be able to take advantage of those experiences?
You were on the vanguard of the internet 30 years ago. And potentially we're at the beginning of this whole new era of the metaverse. Who knows what the world's going to look like 2 decades from now? But I think to your point, we are in an era of like 14 Gutenberg changes, and things are changing kind of really rapidly. So kind of shifting gears, Todd, you have advised a ton of different CEOs and have been involved in building many different companies. What would you say is like the most prevalent mistake you've seen sort of a CEO make in the sort of rapid blitz scaling process? Recognizing you probably see lots of different things, but if there's like one thing that you see, and I'd say maybe in particular, a CEO kind of going through that blitz scaling process for the first time.
Two things. And if any of my CEOs hear this, they'll smile, because it's something I really dig into. But it's values. They focus on execution. They focus on speed, output, and they look at values as they know it's important. They know it's part of the exercise, but when it comes to actually investing in that exercise, which isn't an easy exercise, it's what's the Druckerism culture eats strategy for lunch? Your first 5 people, and your next 5 people, and your next 10 people, I call it the first 50. Your first 50 people will color your next 500. And I watch it in a good way and in a not good way in companies I've worked with and for. And it's magical if your first 50 are connected, aligned, and believe in the same way, versus if your first 50 don't, chaos ensues, because you don't have alignment.
It's interesting. We had a staff call earlier this week, and we're talking about the importance of values at Venture for Canada. And one of the things that I was reflecting on is values are important all the time, but they're particularly important in moments of intense challenge. That it's when you're faced with a moral dilemma, or your back is up against the wall, or you're facing an existential crisis as a company, that's when you're tested in terms of your values. So one question I have related to this, Todd, is, okay, let's say you're CEO of a 200-person company. You think a lot about values, you articulate values. How do you really operationalize the values? How do you make sure that the values, yes, they govern your behavior every day, but how do you make sure that they're cross-cutting across the organization, that they're things that they're not just on a bookmark that people have in their desk, but it's something that people actually live and breathe every day?
It's like everything. It's like good nutrition. It's like good sleep. It isn't a separate thought. It's part of your actions every day, and it's something you identify. So back to the 200-person thing, you, in a cascading way, because you can't talk to 200 people all the time, or 2,000 or 20,000, but you can start to empower your leaders. And the concept of the leadership of one, my book, is really about creating great individual leaders of themselves throughout the whole organization. So their mindset's already tuned, because what's good in leading yourself is one-to-one with leading a company or an exercise or an initiative. It's all the same thing. And so really, I think great organizations in a decentralized world are going to be people who have aligned on their self-awareness, on their values, both personally in some senses, but when people aren't aligned personally, you can align professionally and corporately, just probably not as effectively. And so I think it's living your values. It's just words when you hear it, but if you truly habitualize it, make it part of your life, and part of your leader's life, and then those leaders make it part of their life, and you make it forefront in the organization, as opposed to MRR. I walk in organizations all the time where, tell me about your organization. They lead with their MRR, and then they talk about their top customers, and they talk about their goals and objectives. And very seldom do I hear, we've been doing a value audit, and this whole value about value first is starting to slip, because we are behind our revenue number right now. And so it's really easy to fall off that value because we need to make our revenue number. What do I do? And building sustainable businesses long term, those are the conversations you want to have, not what is my MRR.
It goes back to that Simon Sinek, the start with why too. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, if you start with, okay, this is why we're doing it. We're doing it not to get a big valuation, not to become rich, but we're doing it because there's this problem. We hate the problem. We want to solve the problem. We want to change the world. And ultimately, that's a lot more inspiring than be okay, this is our growth rate, yada, yada, yada. This is how we're going to grow. And I think it's something that's really important is start with the why of what are you doing, why are you actually doing everything versus the what. One thing that we've explored a lot on this podcast, Todd, with various venture capitalists. I remember I asked Matt Golden of Golden Venture Partners this question, which was, what is one common trend in venture capital that he disagrees with? And he responded is the valuations. He's which of course, if you're a venture capitalist, you're going to complain about the valuations because of bad deals and things. But one of the things he talked about is that some of the valuations currently that startups have are so outlandish at an early stage that it creates this ridiculous pressure on founders to achieve targets that are in some way, they're achievable, but they're really hard to achieve. So to your point about values, right? If you're you've raised money and you've let's say you're an really early stage company, you've raised it, let's say your company's valued $50 million, even though you generate $200,000 in revenue a year. and the company is like 6 months old, and you have these huge revenue targets to meet. Do you think that the kind of in many ways the asset bubble of venture capital, which some argues kind of exists, and the soaring valuations challenges entrepreneurs to particularly entrepreneurs raising venture capital to kind of look the other way? Do you think that the system sometimes places more emphasis on, the reason why entrepreneurs often put more an emphasis on their MRR, their results, is perhaps systemic, right? That ultimately it's what funders are focusing on and venture capitalists. So that's what entrepreneurs focus on.
Well, back to what you were talking about, Mark Twain and rhyming. Just go back to 2000 and think about the stratospheric valuations that were happening, not based on fundamentals. And so I think what's happened is in this current marketplace, it's the financial markets that do it. When the Tigers and the SoftBanks of the world come in to offices with open checkbooks and good things, it's really hard to not do that. I'm sitting here as a human right now and saying, if somebody came to me and says, here's $100 million, $1 billion, and you've got $5 million in revenue, it's going to take you 8 years to catch up to your valuation. I think that's the conversation is always, if you're focused, you talked about value and valuation, those are inextricably tied long term. And so if you as a CEO can be focused on what that valuation means to your short, medium, and long-term growth, and that you can grow into your value, and the money that you're raising is money that's going to just advantage you to be able to do it sooner than later, great. That's an informed, mature, wise approach, I think. But yes, we're seeing many companies that have put themselves in a situation where if they need to go out for raising, that they're going to see a very different market over time, and that the valuations will kind of correct. But on the other side, on the flip side, I believe more than any other time that the growth opportunities here and the ability to scale your revenue quickly is there. I don't think everybody's being painted sometimes with the same brush, but I think the sophisticated investor is still saying, hey, I'm willing to write at this huge valuation. I think 1Password has got a $6.5 billion valuation in their last round. That seemed really, really high, but they're looking where the puck's going. They're already looking at crypto and how they're going to get in front of that next wave, which is 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times more authentication points. Maybe not, So I think we're in this really transformational time where, again, don't judge the valuation, just seek to understand what lives beneath it and is there true value. And there's a book by Mark Carney called Values. It's actually a really great book that talks about the human part of the values and to build sustainability, how you're going to develop and evaluate and measure value moving forward, and the leadership that's going to be required to be able to underwrite that, sustain that. And so, again, probably a longer answer than you wanted, but I really, as an entrepreneur first, and I don't look at myself as a venture capitalist. I look at myself as a venture partner. And we call ourselves a venture corporation. The Xchange company is a venture corporation. And it's all about coming in and becoming the partner with the founders in a way that allows us to be truly a trusted advocate. So one of our things we don't do is take a board seat. What we do is we become an observer. That way it doesn't conflict us, because the board hires and fires the CEO. So, God bless that CEO that kind of really trusts one of those board members with one of their problems or one of their issues, because they're exposed. And so what I'm really trying to do is really get into the court of the the founder. And what I would say is founders are very smart, they're very savvy, and they're very open to information, so that they don't over rotate, because there is that pain of repricing and a down round valuation that really hurts. And so, but getting into the founder's mind of what they're trying to create from a value perspective, if that aligns with the valuation, all day, all long, I'll write the check.
To your point, if you're an entrepreneur, you can take the $100 million if you think it is reasonable that you will achieve the valuation. But in essence, if you have a lingering thing in your stomach that I'm entering into a deal that you cannot meaningfully fulfill, don't do it. And I think it's a good thing in life in general. It's something even in the charitable sector, I see a lot of times nonprofits get into arrangements where they'll say, oh, we can do this because they can get a bunch of money to do something. And then it's like, okay, well, can you actually deliver on the promise? So I think that to our previous point about trust, don't get into deals that you cannot actually fulfill the terms, because it's important to have that reliability, that credibility, and trust is something that's really key. Todd, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. We've talked about a ton of different topics, from the metaverse to how to build trust, to trends in venture capital, to the importance of adaptability, the importance of self-awareness, a really wide range of different subjects. It's been a true pleasure speaking with you this morning. Thanks for coming on the podcast. That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada. That is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Stewart, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Juanita Lee Garcia and Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormanston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided stated by our guests and our host is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.